I'm Emma, 29 years old, and I always believed family meant unconditional love. My grandmother, Margaret, raised me after mom died, teaching me values no money could buy. My father, Richard, was different, always distant, watching grandma's fortune from afar. At the funeral, when dad inherited $45 million, he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Pack your things. You're no longer needed here." What he didn't know about the will would change everything in just 24 hours. The earliest memory I have of my mother is her reading bedtime stories in our tiny apartment. Catherine was her name, and she had the most beautiful smile that could light up any room. I was only 7 when leukemia took her away from us. The hospital visits became our routine, sterile hallways, beeping machines, and my mother's weakening voice assuring me everything would be okay. When she passed, my father, Richard, barely shed a tear. "Life goes on," he told me matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather rather than losing the woman we both loved. That same day, my grandmother Margaret arrived with a suitcase and determination in her eyes. "You're coming home with me, sweetheart," she said, and I've never been more grateful for anyone in my life. Margaret's Victorian house became my sanctuary. With its creaking wooden floors, stained glass windows, and rooms filled with antiques, it felt like stepping into a fairy tale. "Your mother grew up in this very room," Grandma told me as she tucked me into the 4-poster bed that first night. The walls were painted soft lavender, and bookshelves lined every corner, a reader's paradise. Margaret Henderson was a force of nature. She'd built Henderson Industries, a textile manufacturing company, from a small seamstress shop into a multi-million-dollar empire. At 68, she still went to the office 3 times a week, though she'd officially retired, and handed operations to her management team. "Never let anyone tell you that women can't build empires," she'd say, adjusting her pearl necklace with pride. My father worked as a marketing director for a competing company, always bitter that he hadn't inherited the family business. Richard visited us monthly, and those visits followed a predictable pattern. He'd arrive with expensive gifts, toys I didn't need, clothes that weren't my style, then spend the afternoon asking Grandma probing questions about the company's finances and her estate planning. "How's business, Mother?" he'd ask during dinner, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "The textile industry has been volatile lately. Are you sure your investments are properly diversified?" Margaret would smile sweetly. "The business is fine, Richard. Harold manages the portfolio beautifully." Harold Morrison was her financial advisor, a trusted friend of 40 years who treated our family's wealth with the care of a museum curator. Throughout my childhood, I tried desperately to connect with my father. Every school play, science fair, and graduation, I'd scan the audience hoping to see his face. Grandma never missed an event, always sitting front row with her camera ready, beaming with pride. Dad showed up maybe 1 time out of 5, usually arriving late and leaving early with excuses about urgent meetings. When I turned 18 and was choosing colleges, I selected business school, hoping it might finally give us something in common. "Dad, I want to study business like you," I told him excitedly over the phone. "Smart choice," he replied without enthusiasm. "It's practical. You'll need financial security." Meanwhile, Grandma took me shopping for dorm supplies and helped me pick classes. "Follow your passions, Emma," she advised. "Money follows passion, not the other way around." She gave me a leather journal that day with an inscription inside. "To my brilliant granddaughter, may you build something beautiful with your life." College years flew by with Grandma's constant support. She visited every semester, took me and my friends out for fancy dinners, and sent care packages filled with homemade cookies and encouraging notes. Dad sent birthday cards, store-bought ones with generic messages and his signature, nothing more. After graduation, I moved back home with Grandma while starting my career in digital marketing. The textile industry was evolving, and I helped Henderson Industries develop their online presence. Grandma was fascinated by social media and e-commerce, asking endless questions about reaching younger customers. "You have such fresh ideas," she'd say during our morning coffee sessions. "The business world needs people like you, those who understand both tradition and innovation." When I turned 25, Grandma began experiencing health issues. What started as occasional fatigue progressed to frequent doctor visits. The diagnosis hit like lightning: stage 3 pancreatic cancer. The oncologist gave her 6 to 12 months with aggressive treatment. Without hesitation, I moved back into my childhood bedroom to become her caregiver. My marketing clients were understanding when I explained the situation, allowing me to Work remotely with reduced hours. Some evenings, when pain medication made it difficult for Grandma to sleep, we'd sit in her study talking about everything business, life, love, and her hopes for my future. "Promise me something," she said one night as I adjusted her pillows. "Promise you'll never settle for less than you deserve, whether in business or love. You have so much potential, Emma." "I promise, Grandma." During this period, Richard's visits became more frequent. Suddenly, the father who'd been absent for most of my life was showing up twice weekly, bringing expensive wine and gourmet meals that Grandma could barely eat. His conversations focused heavily on her estate planning and the future of Henderson Industries. "Have you updated your will recently, Mother?" he asked during one visit, his tone carefully casual. "Tax laws have changed significantly. You might want Harold to review everything." Grandma would smile politely but change the subject. After he left, she'd often shake her head sadly. "Some people only show love when they think there's something to gain from it." 3 weeks before she passed, Grandma had a private meeting with Harold. They spent hours behind closed doors in her study, reviewing documents and speaking in hushed tones. When Harold left, he patted my shoulder gently. "Take care of yourself, Emma. Your grandmother is very proud of you." That night, Grandma seemed more at peace than she'd been in months. "I've taken care of everything," she told me. "You don't need to worry about your future." Margaret Henderson passed away peacefully on a Sunday morning in March. I was holding her hand, reading from her favorite book of poetry, when her breathing simply stopped. The hospice nurse confirmed what I already knew: she was gone. My first call was to the funeral home, my second to Richard. Despite the early hour, he answered immediately. "I'll be right there," he said, his voice sharp with alertness. "Don't call anyone else yet." Richard arrived within an hour, dressed in a black suit despite the AM time. Before offering any comfort for my grief, he began searching through Grandma's desk and file cabinets. "What are you doing?" I asked through tears. "Looking for important documents," he replied matter-of-factly. "The will, insurance policies, business papers. These things need to be secured immediately." While I sat in shock beside my grandmother's bed, my father made phone calls to lawyers, the funeral home, and Henderson Industries board of directors. His efficiency was unsettling. There was no room for grief in his systematic handling of death. The funeral was beautiful, despite Richard's attempts to control every detail. Margaret had planned most of it herself, choosing readings, music, and flowers that reflected her vibrant personality. The church overflowed with people whose lives she'd touched, employees she'd mentored, charities she'd supported, and friends spanning decades. I delivered the eulogy, sharing stories of Grandma's wisdom, generosity, and unwavering belief in the potential of others. Richard spoke as well, focusing primarily on her business accomplishments and lasting legacy, but somehow managing to make it sound more like a corporate presentation than a personal goodbye. After the service, Harold approached me privately. "Emma, we need to schedule the will reading for tomorrow at p.m. Please be prompt." Richard overheard and immediately inserted himself. "I've cleared my entire schedule. Will the business transfer documents be ready as well?" Harold's expression remained neutral. "All relevant documents will be presented tomorrow." That evening, Richard and I sat in Grandma's living room, surrounded by the silence of her absence. The house felt cavernous without her presence. "You should start packing your things," Richard said suddenly. I looked up from the photo album I'd been flipping through mindlessly. "What?" "After tomorrow's reading, I'll need to move in here. As the new owner of Henderson Industries, it makes sense to live in the family home. You'll need to find your own place." My heart stopped. "This has been my home for over 20 years. "It was Mother's home," he corrected coldly. "Now it will be mine. The business will require my full attention, and I can't have distractions." That night, I cried myself to sleep, not just for losing Grandma, but for the harsh reality that my father saw me as nothing more than a burden to be discarded. The next afternoon, we gathered in Harold's conference room for the will reading. Richard sat confidently behind the mahogany table, already carrying himself differently, like a man who'd finally claimed his birthright. Several Henderson Industries executives attended, along with the company's financial advisors. Harold opened the thick document and began reading the standard provisions: funeral arrangements, charitable donations, gifts to long-term employees. Richard fidgeted impatiently until Harold reached the main clause: "To my son, Richard Michael Henderson, I leave Henderson Industries and all its holdings, valued at approximately $45 million, along with the family home and its contents. Richard's face lit up with triumph. The executives offered congratulations while glancing sympathetically in my direction. I sat perfectly still, hands folded, trying to process the complete absence of my name from what I'd considered my inheritance too. Harold continued reading various business transitions and charitable bequests. When he finished, people began gathering, their things to leave. Richard remained seated, now openly smiling. Is that everything? I asked Harold quietly, my voice barely steady. Before Harold could respond, Richard interjected. You heard it all, Emma. The company and estate come to me. He stood and buttoned his suit jacket. I'll give you until tomorrow evening to remove your belongings. The movers are coming Monday to redecorate. Harold watched this exchange with an unreadable expression. Mr. Henderson, perhaps you'd like to review the complete document at your leisure? He offered Richard the thick folder. I caught the important parts, Richard replied dismissively. Have your office send me a summary. He turned to me with cold finality. Your services as a caregiver are no longer required. Frankly, you're useless to me now. The cruelty of those words felt like a physical blow. 22 years of hoping for his approval crashed down around me as I finally saw my father's true nature, someone who could discard his only child the moment she was no longer convenient. The next morning, I packed my life into 2 suitcases, trying to decide which memories I could fit and which would be left behind. Each item told a story: the music box Grandma gave me for my sweet 16, the collection of vintage books we'd read together, the quilt her mother had made by hand. As I loaded my car, Richard watched from the front porch, checking his watch impatiently. Finally, he muttered when I closed the trunk. The interior designers are coming at noon. I drove to the Riverside Inn, a modest hotel that offered weekly rates. The room was clean but sterile, beige walls and generic artwork, nothing like the character-filled home I'd just lost. I placed Grandma's quilt on the bed, a small attempt to make the space feel less foreign, then sat by the window and finally allowed myself to completely break down. My phone rang around noon, an unfamiliar number I almost ignored. Emma Henderson? A formal voice inquired. Yes, this is Janet from Harold Morrison's law office. Mr. Morrison would like to meet with you this afternoon if possible. He says it's urgent regarding your grandmother's estate. We arranged a PM appointment. I spent the intervening hours wondering what Harold wanted. Perhaps there was a small personal bequest he hadn't mentioned during the formal reading. Harold's office was located in a stately downtown building. The interior featured dark wood paneling and walls lined with leather-bound legal books. When I arrived, Harold rose to greet me, his expression much warmer than the professional demeanor from yesterday. Thank you for coming, Emma, he said, gesturing to a comfortable chair. I imagine you've had a difficult 24 hours. The simple acknowledgement broke something loose inside me. Richard had me escorted out this morning. I managed through tears. My own father. Harold's eyebrows shot up. Did he indeed? That's very interesting timing. He reached for a leather portfolio on his desk. Tell me, Emma, did your father actually read the complete will? I stared at him, confusion replacing grief. What do you mean? I was there for the reading. The primary provisions were read aloud, yes. But did Richard review the full document afterward? All the conditions and clauses? He told you to send a summary to his office, I recalled. Said he caught the important parts. Harold chuckled softly. Ah, there's the Richard Henderson I've known for 30 years. Always too impatient for details. He opened the portfolio and removed the thick document. Your grandmother anticipated this exact behavior. My heart began racing. What do you mean? Margaret and I spent considerable time crafting this will, particularly over the last 6 months. The inheritance does go to Richard, but with very specific conditions attached. He put on his reading glasses and flipped to a marked page. The bequest to my son Richard Michael Henderson is contingent upon his agreement to provide lifetime support for my granddaughter Emma Catherine Henderson, including housing at the family residence, a monthly allowance of $8,000 for living expenses, and coverage of all educational and health care costs she may incur. My mouth fell open as Harold continued. Should Richard fail to fulfill these obligations at any time, or should he act in a manner that causes significant distress or hardship to Emma, the entirety of the estate including Henderson Industries and all associated holdings shall immediately transfer to Emma Catherine Henderson. The room spun around me, but he violated that condition. He threw me out this morning. Harold's eyes twinkled. Precisely. And in doing so, less than 24 hours after the will reading, he defaulted on the primary condition of his inheritance. So, what does that mean? I asked, barely able to process the implications. It means, my dear, that according to the legally binding terms of your grandmother's will, you are now the sole owner of Henderson Industries and all associated assets valued at approximately $45 million. I gasped, covering my mouth with my hand. That can't be right. No mistake. Harold removed his glasses. Margaret knew her son better than anyone. She told me, Richard will show his true colors within a week, probably within a day. She was quite accurate. But why not just leave everything to me directly? Your grandmother was a wise woman who understood human nature. She wanted to give Richard one final chance to do the right thing, to be the father he should have been. But she also wanted to protect you, which is why she created this mechanism. Does Richard know yet? Harold shook his head. No, and his reaction should be quite enlightening. Your father was too eager to count his millions to bother reading the document that granted them. As the reality sank in, I felt a mixture of emotions: grief for what might have been with my father, gratitude for Grandma's wisdom, and surprisingly, a growing confidence that maybe I was more prepared for this responsibility than I'd thought. There's more, Harold continued, removing another document. Margaret left video messages for both you and Richard. She requested they be viewed together with me present. Shall we schedule that for tomorrow morning? I nodded, still overwhelmed by this complete reversal of fortune. Harold handed me a business card. This is the contact for the estate security company. You may wish to have them meet you at the house this evening. To do what? A smile crossed his face. To change the locks back, of course. It's your house now, Emma. As I drove back to what was once again my home, the world looked different. The same streets I'd driven in despair that morning now seemed full of possibility. I called the security company, and they agreed to meet me at PM to change the locks and update the security system. When I arrived, Richard's BMW was still in the driveway. My stomach tightened, but I forced myself to continue. This was my home. Now, the security team arrived promptly, 3 professional officers who'd clearly done this before. I showed them Harold's documentation proving my legal ownership. Richard answered the door, his expression shifting from annoyance to shock when he saw me with the security team. What's the meaning of this? He demanded. The lead officer stepped forward. Sir, we've been authorized to change the security protocols on this property at the request of the legal owner, Miss Emma Henderson. Richard's face flushed red. That's ridiculous. I own this property as of yesterday. There was a condition to your inheritance that you violated when you evicted me this morning, I said, finding strength in the truth. You might want to call Harold for clarification. What condition? What are you talking about? Perhaps we should discuss this inside, I suggested, aware of the security team witnessing our family drama. We moved to Grandma's study while the security team worked. Explain yourself, Richard demanded once the door closed. Grandma's will required you to provide for me, including letting me live here. By throwing me out, you violated the terms and forfeited the inheritance. Richard went pale. That's impossible. Harold would have mentioned something that significant. It was in the full document you chose not to read. We have a meeting tomorrow at M to discuss everything formally. For a moment, Richard seemed to deflate. Then his expression hardened. This is some kind of trick. The will was written and notarized months ago, I replied. Grandma knew exactly what would happen. The security team leader knocked before entering. Miss Henderson, we've changed all the locks. Here are your new keys. Richard stared at the man, then at me, reality finally penetrating his denial. This is my house. Not anymore, I said simply, taking the keys. I'm sorry it happened this way, Dad. Grandma gave you a chance to do the right thing. The next morning, I arrived at Harold's office early, my nerves twisted in knots. Despite legally having the advantage, facing my father still intimidated me after years of seeking his approval. Exactly I am. Richard strode in, his shock replaced by calculated composure. This misunderstanding can be resolved, he began immediately. I'm prepared to let you stay in the guest house while we work out proper arrangements. There's no misunderstanding, Harold interrupted. The will's terms were clear. and Richard violated them within one day. Before we discuss anything, Margaret requested both of you view these messages. Harold dimmed the lights and started the first video. Grandma's face appeared on screen, and my throat tightened with emotion. She was seated in her study, looking frail but determined. Richard, she began, addressing my father directly, if you're watching this, you've done exactly what I predicted. You've shown Emma the door now that you believe you've secured your inheritance. Richard shifted uncomfortably as Grandma continued. I've watched you chase wealth your entire life, believing it would bring satisfaction. I gave you one final test, one opportunity to show that family meant more than fortune. All you had to do was share your abundance with your daughter. Her voice grew stronger. Instead, you showed Emma the same coldness you've displayed throughout her life. The company now belongs to Emma, as does the house and all assets. This isn't punishment, Richard, it's the natural consequence of your choices. The first video ended in heavy silence. Harold started the second one, addressed to me. My dearest Emma, Grandma began, her expression much warmer. If you're watching this, everything has happened as I expected. I'm sorry for Richard's behavior, but not surprised by it. She leaned forward, eyes seemingly looking directly into mine. You've shown me what true family means through your actions. Henderson Industries is now yours. Don't be intimidated. You have a natural understanding of people that Richard never possessed. Lead with compassion, but never confuse it with weakness. As the video ended, I wiped tears from my cheeks. Harold turned on the lights and removed one final document. There's one more provision, he said. If Richard demonstrates genuine change and contributes meaningfully to the company over at least 2 years, Emma may consider sharing ownership with him. This decision belongs entirely to Emma and must come from authentic relationship, not obligation. Richard sat silently, his attorney whispering urgently in his ear. Finally, he looked at me with something resembling desperation. Emma, be reasonable. I'm your father. This company has been my future for decades. You don't know the first thing about running a textile business? I can learn, I replied simply. Grandma believed I could. We can work together, he tried. Father and daughter, as it should have been. His sudden transformation was so transparent it was almost sad. The man who'd called me useless 24 hours earlier was now performing caring father. I need time to understand the business first, I said carefully, without confusion about leadership. Richard's mask slipped. You're making a mistake. The board respects me. Clients know me. They won't accept you. Harold intervened. Actually, I spoke with the board this morning. They've expressed full support for Emma. Margaret discussed this contingency with each of them. This seemed to shake Richard more than anything. She planned this all along. She hoped it wouldn't be necessary, Harold corrected. But yes, she prepared thoroughly. Richard stood abruptly. This isn't over. I'll contest the will. You're welcome to try, Harold replied calmly. However, any legal challenge automatically triggers complete forfeiture of the provision allowing you to potentially earn back company ownership. As they prepared to leave, I found my voice. Dad, Grandma left you a path back if you want it. Not to control everything, but to be part of the legacy she built. That opportunity is real, but only if your change is real too. Richard paused at the door. For a moment, I thought he might respond genuinely. Instead, he straightened and walked out without another word. Over the following months, I threw myself into learning Henderson Industries from the ground up. The company was solid but needed modernization. I expanded our e-commerce platform, developed sustainable fabric lines, and improved worker benefits. The board, initially skeptical, became increasingly supportive as results improved. Richard made several attempts at reconciliation, each following predictable patterns. Sometimes vulnerable, alluding to loneliness or regret, other times business-focused, trying to leverage his industry connections. Each time, I maintained boundaries while leaving the door open for genuine relationship. 6 months later, I established the Margaret Henderson Foundation, providing scholarships for underprivileged students pursuing business degrees. The foundation honored Grandma's belief in opportunity and education while creating positive publicity for the company. Richard appeared at the launch event uninvited, positioning himself near me during photos as if he'd been involved in planning. I didn't correct reporters' assumptions, choosing to focus on the foundation's mission rather than family politics. That evening, Richard approached me privately. Clever move with the foundation, he said. Good for business. it's not about business, I corrected. It's about honoring Grandma's values. Richard studied me carefully. You really believe that, don't you? That business can be about more than profit. I do. And so did Grandma. Something shifted in his expression, recognition that he'd fundamentally misunderstood something important about our family legacy. She left you more than money, didn't she? Yes, I acknowledged. And that's worth more than $45 million. Richard nodded slowly and left without his usual pitch for business involvement. It would be weeks before I heard from him again. During that time, I made a decision. After careful consideration, I established a modest trust fund for Richard, providing comfortable living without company control. Harold advised against it legally but supported me personally. When Richard learned about the trust, his reaction surprised me. Rather than viewing it as an opening to negotiate for more, he accepted it with quiet dignity. Gradually, something resembling genuine relationship began forming between us, fragile and awkward, but built on honest conversations rather than manipulation. 1 year after inheriting Henderson Industries, I invited Richard to join an advisory board alongside industry experts and community leaders. The position carried prestige but limited authority, a step toward inclusion without compromising the company's direction. Thank you for this opportunity, he said when I offered the position. I won't disappoint you. I hope not, I replied honestly. Grandma wanted you to have a path back. This is part of it. The healing between us remained incomplete and perhaps always would. Some wounds leave permanent scars, but the journey from that cruel dismissal to our current cautious collaboration represented growth neither of us had thought possible. Henderson Industries flourished under my leadership. We maintained Grandma's core values while expanding into sustainable practices and ethical manufacturing. The foundation grew to support dozens of students annually, creating pathways to success that honored Margaret's belief in human potential. The most profound change was within myself. The girl desperately seeking her father's approval had become a woman secure in her own judgment. The uncertainty I'd felt upon inheriting the company transformed into quiet confidence. 2 years after Grandma's death, I visited her grave alone. The simple headstone bore her name and chosen words. She built bridges between hearts and minds. You were right about everything, I told her, placing fresh flowers beside the stone. About the company, about Dad, about me. The spring breeze rustled through nearby trees, and in that peaceful moment, I felt profound gratitude for Grandma's final lesson that true family is defined by love and respect, not merely blood or legal documents. The inheritance she left was far more than money. It was understanding that how we treat others reveals our character. It was courage to stand firm in my values despite manipulation or rejection. And it was wisdom to recognize that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, but it does allow new beginnings. As I drove home to the house that was now truly mine, I reflected on how dramatically life can change. In 24 hours, I'd gone from homeless to owner of a $45 million company, but the real transformation took longer and reached deeper than any legal transfer of assets. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters. And that lesson was the greatest inheritance of all.